Hey, how's it going, movie fans? The Amazing Spider-Man is officially 10 years old, which is crazy to think how fast time flies by. And essentially, I'm doing this retrospective review to essentially lead up to Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And because I watched No Way Home again, and I felt like I felt obligated to talk about Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man once again. Abandoned by his parents and raised by an aunt and uncle, teenager Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, is trying to sort out who he is and exactly what his feelings are for his first crush, Gwen Stacy. When Peter finds a mysterious briefcase that was his father's, he pursues a quest to solve his parents' disappearance. His search leads him to Oscorp and the lab of Dr. Connors, aka the Lizard. Quite frankly, ever since this movie came out in 2012, which, God, that's crazy to think about, I never thought that this movie and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 deserved the hate that they got. Maybe more so with The Amazing Spider-Man 2, that was a little bit more warranted considering that film was a bit more convoluted. But I'm gonna be honest with with all these films, with The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and this movie, I never thought that they were bad.
You what?
And Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, I personally believe is still better than Tom Holland's version of Spider-Man. Now, what I would have preferred for them to do, since he doesn't look like a high school teenager in this movie, again, they do the same thing with Tobey, where they kind of don't have any of the casting look like teenagers in the movie.
Just step aside, kid.
I do feel like his overall Peter Parker is actually very different from both Tobey and Tom, but also works in the type of story that they're telling, and it does lead to him actually fully learning a message by the end of the movie. Also, his performance was actually very well done as Peter Parker. He's a very shy, awkward, extremely awkward high schooler.
It's 2:07.
Yeah, no, I know.
Who essentially just doesn't seem like he's all there. And I know a lot of people say, oh, looks like he's kind of like dazed all the time, and he looks like he's been smoking weed. I'm gonna be honest with you, isn't this what a lot of high schoolers look like? I mean, go down to your local high school and see how many kids act like that. Now, one thing I don't think is really fitting for this version is nerdy Peter Parker, considering the fact that he's skateboarding. It's like, oh, you're such a nerd by putting on your glasses. Then you see him skateboarding around and stuff. And plus he's really, really handsome. So I don't really see why a lot of these people would actually think of him as being an outcast. But for the sake of it, I'm just gonna go with it for this version of the character. Where he truly shines is in his performance when he's underneath the mask. He nails Spider-Man perfectly. Spider-Man is oftentimes used to mask the fear of Peter Parker, whereas with a character like Batman in the DC universe, that mask is used to invoke fear. And Andrew Garfield nails that side of Spider-Man perfectly in this movie. Especially the quipping. The quipping is just fantastic from him.
Just let me go.
Is that a knife? Is that a real knife?
Yes, it's a real knife.
My weakness, it's small knives.
Just let me go.
Anything but knives!
Oh, it's so simple.
That was cool, man.
What the hell is this?
Webbing that I developed myself. I don't think you really want to know.
Come
right
on,
now.
let me go.
One second.
Knock it off, man. No.
Also, the action in this movie actually felt way more grounded than you would expect from a Spider-Man movie, which I do feel like is kind of a problem considering the fact that it doesn't feel entirely like Spider-Man except for those sequences when he's swinging. That feels like straight up Spider-Man right there. The web swinging, whenever he swings and he swings downwards, you can just feel your stomach drop along with him. And no offense to Mary Jane in the prior Tobey Maguire films, but I do feel like she wasn't a great love interest. Her overall character was actually decently written, and there was more depth than a lot of people give her credit for. However, I do feel like Gwen Stacy does have more natural chemistry with Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, as the two actors in real life were dating. So they really did bring that chemistry to their characters, and it worked perfectly, especially with the writing. It just came off a little bit awkward and a little bit cringeworthy, but then it balanced out with just overall great chemistry. And ultimately, when Gwen Stacy does die in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, that's the reason why it hits harder, is because she was a great love interest for Peter Parker, and I love seeing the two of them together in these movies. Uncle Ben and Aunt May in this version, I do prefer the other versions from Tobey Maguire's universe. However, in this universe, if you were to tell me which ones I actually care about a little bit more on a personal level, I do feel like these two versions of the character work very well, as this world that they've established within these characters feels more grounded. That's something I noticed with all the Mark Webb Spider-Man films, are that they're definitely not necessarily grounded, but they're more grounded with their characters. Also, I do find the Parker storyline leading to Peter getting adopted, or I guess the Parkers just throw Peter into Uncle Ben and Aunt May's house to take care of him into his adulthood. I do find the storyline with the Parkers, his parents, to be very interesting, as the whole spy parents is something that does happen in the comic books. I mean, as a matter of fact, I own some old Spider-Man comic books that have the Parkers storyline in there. However, for me personally, when you're talking about an everyday man Spider-Man, I do feel like that does take away from the everyday man aspect of Peter Parker. However, at the same time, I do find it interesting that they try to explore the aspect that hasn't been explored yet, and that's what happened to Peter's parents, because we always just saw him just with Aunt May and Uncle Ben in the other version, whereas in this one, they actually try to give some backstory as to why he ends up with these two caretakers. Also, another thing that I kind of noticed in the movie too is that I hate when people rag on a suit, because, yeah, admittedly, it does look like a basketball. I will admit that. But in certain lighting, when it's in the dark, it actually looks really good. And the whole aspect to it is, I think that's not supposed to look good. And he took soles off of Nikes and puts them on the bottom of the suit. He also puts like sunglass lenses and like the mask and stuff, so I do find that kind of like interesting. However, admittedly, if he can afford to build some web shooters, he probably can't afford to make a better suit, so I can't really let that slide neither. Also, Uncle Ben's death was not as impacting in the other movie as well, because due to the fact that it's very, you just know it's coming.
Hey, stop! Somebody stop that dude!
Also, Uncle Ben's death in this movie is not as impactful as it should be, because you know it's coming, and it does follow some very similar story beats from this prior Spider-Man movies.
Hey, kid, little help?
Not my policy.
Could have taken that guy apart. Now he's gonna get away with my money.
I missed the part where that's my problem.
And they came out so close together to the point where you don't really have time for this to breathe. And it does follow very similar story beats from the prior movie as well, which is why the origin story, for a lot of people, including myself, does not work as well as that first movie. We have the whole arc of Peter learning the whole importance of responsibility. We have him essentially getting the love interest. We have him essentially facing a crazy scientist who goes insane, who happens to have connections to him directly as well. A lot of these story beats are not coincidence. They are very much the same thing. However, one thing I do find as a very interesting aspect to this version of the origin is the fact that the origin is throughout the entire movie. Whereas the origin in the first movie with Tobey was actually taking place through half that movie. It goes from Vengeance, where we have Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man constantly going after Uncle Ben's killer, not really taking into consideration that he's not taking other people into consideration. And the whole point is that then throughout the entire movie he starts to take those words that Uncle Ben said to him at the beginning before he died to heart, and then finally becomes a selfless true hero who then has to assume responsibility for the lizard and finally become the hero that the city needs, rather than a vengeful person who's trying to find his uncle's killer. I also love the fact that Andrew makes his own web shooters in this movie. I mean, that's classic Peter Parker right there, and I do feel like that was really cool that they brought that back. Just a minor side note. Also, one thing I wasn't expecting to like looking back at this movie was Gwen's father. I remember watching this movie 10 years ago and going, I hate this character, I hate him. But now I understand the importance of his character and how crucial he was to Peter Parker's character.
It's on the way, okay?
You need to be gone when they get here. Okay.
I'm not going anywhere.
I was wrong about you, Peter. The city needs you. Here. You're gonna need this.
Where he needed to make that sacrifice for Peter to realize that people are going to get hurt around him and that he needs to stay away from Gwen.
So I want you to promise me something, okay? Leave Gwen out of it. Promise me that.
A lesson that he clearly does not take to heart in the next movie, which leads to her death, but I do like that minor aspect that they had in this movie, where essentially he does tell Peter to his face before he dies, the city needs you, man, and he confesses that he was wrong throughout the entire movie to go after him. A very beautiful moment, and I thought that was just really well done. Now, the weakest link to this movie is the Lizard.
You serious?
The Lizard feels like a carbon copy of the Green Goblin character. I mean, you look at a lot of the writing aspects that happen throughout this, a lot of the same story beats end up happening. Oh, we got another mad scientist who goes insane and talks to himself in the mirror, who has a double voice. Yeah, it sounds very similar. And also his plan is completely ridiculous, and I do feel like, again, is the weakest part of this movie. You're gonna turn the whole city of people into lizard people. You know, for Mark Webb's more grounded take on Spider-Man, he's not really doing that great of a job with that. All in all, I still think that this movie is really, really good. I do not think it's as good as Tobey's first film. However, I do really, really think it's very solid, and I do prefer it over Tom's first two films, except No Way Home. I think that one beats this one out by a large margin. But however, I do think that this movie should not be overlooked. And 10 years later, I still think that it holds up pretty well. I don't think it holds up as well as the first Tobey film, but I do think that it's very solid and it's still going to hold up 20 years later and so. And when this year officially turns 11 years old. What do you guys think of this first Mark Webb Spider-Man movie? Comment down below and let me know, does it still hold up? As always, if you guys liked the video, make sure to subscribe today to join the Azilization.